Welcome to the Gold Standard. My name is Braden Gall, and you can get to me on any of the social media platforms that you still think are entertaining at Braden Gall.
I'm Emma Lingan, and you can get to me at Emma_Lingan.
I'm Michael Gallagher. You can get to me on Twitter at MGSports_.
So we'll discuss the goaltending situation here. I know Michael, recent piece up on Lower Broad Hockey about Askarov. Yaroslav Askarov. I had a long conversation with Mitch Korn. Hope you guys all check that out. Subscribers only, so make sure you go subscribe to Lower Broad Hockey, and you'll get access to that. We've got some stories coming for you guys this week that we will preview today on the show about the goaltending position as well as the front office. And, of course, you can get Emma's weekly NHL newsletter, all things NHL as it pertains to the Nashville Predators on Fridays. That all, of course, over at Lower Broad Hockey. The Nashville Predators have finally made a move with Cody Glass, and we will discuss his illustrious 121-game career in a Nashville Predators sweater. But other than that, how's everybody doing? How's everybody? Like, we had a mild break in the heat over the weekend. I know, Emma, last week you were complaining, like me, about the heat. Today was not great on Wednesday, but we did get a little break last weekend. How's everybody doing?
Good. I wasn't here last weekend, so missed that. Must be nice.
You went out of town and it got nice and cool. But when I say cool, I just mean it wasn't humid. That's all.
Yeah, I went out of town to somewhere that was hotter, so that's really on me. I went to Florida.
Gallagher, what's up, man? How excited are we today?
I'm very excited, as you can tell by my rosy disposition.
Oh man! All right, so lots of stuff to do. I want to do some housekeeping here. Again, Lower Broad Hockey is the place to go if you want to sign up. We're gonna have some big news coming for you the first week of September, and the more things happen with this organization, guys, the more it does feel like they're setting up for quite a big season. Whether that season ends in quite a big success or quite a lot of conversation, either or, maybe both, who knows? But they're continuing to do all the obvious things. All the things that we've sort of talked about on the show, and that includes starting with all the moves they made in the offseason. Actually, do you trace it back to Ryan McDonough? Is that the first point where you look at it and you go, I think that's the moment where Barry Trotz's entire vision was clearly beginning to be executed? Because it seems like it's been fairly common. Saros' big contract, went and bought some goals scoring in free agency. You did the draft. You're now trading Cody Glass to open up some cap space. It feels like everything is very systematic by Barry Trotz, right?
I think it all started when he re-signed Cole Smith. That's where I'm going to put the pin. That's where the plan started to take shape, in my opinion.
Hey, now. There might be some truth to that. No, there's not truth to that. But I think that, yeah, I think the McDonough move was interesting because it was one that I think from the outside looking in, didn't see coming. But without that, you don't have anywhere near the amount of cap space that you need to make all those signings that you do on July 1st. So
the words are hard today. The McDonough thing kind of came out of nowhere too, because if you remember, Barry said that Ryan came to him in the offseason, was like, hey, I want to be traded back to Tampa Bay. I don't know if that was necessarily on Trotz's radar before that happened. So suddenly you have a star defenseman, you have a hole to fill in your lineup, but you also have, $6.75 million in cap space you didn't have before. So I do think that was probably the first domino that really kind of set this apart, because before trade Ryan McDonough, you have 4 or 5 guys with no trade clauses. You have a lot of your cap space taken up. You have all the dead cap with Duchesne and Johansson still there. So I think that really kind of opened the door. And I think that was probably the first sign where Trotz was probably thinking bigger picture of like, okay, before the McDonough trade, what 1 or 2 pieces do I add to this team that can make us a little bit better than we were last year? Now, after the McDonough trade, I think Trotz was thinking like, okay, we can seriously make a run now with all of this cap space that we have.
Well, and having studied the Titans the last 18 months or so with the new regime, Rand Carthon, the general manager, what I appreciate about a general manager is doing the thing that seems obvious, like doing the obvious thing. Like if you've got a hole at this position and everyone's like, that position needs to get better, and then the GM goes and addresses that position with assets, whether that's free agency or the draft. In the NFL, the draft is far more tied to your needs than in the NHL. But like Rand Carthon has sort of systematically approached their weaknesses, right? Like, hey, we got to fix the offensive line. We got to fix the receiving core. We got to go get corners. We got to go hire a defensive coordinator, et cetera, et cetera. since the Ryan McDonagh trade, it feels very systematically building a team that they think is competitive. And I would love to give anything to I don't know, when do you think, like February, where we didn't quite know if the team was going to make the playoffs or not, to sit down with Barry Trotz, give him some truth serum and be like, what's your plan? Like, I want to know like what he was really thinking about what the plan is, because I think the fact that they went on a run, whatever you want to call that, making it into the playoffs, playing really good hockey the last 2 months of the season, and then you get out, through no control of your own, your $7 million defenseman asks for the trade. It's almost like he then at that point said, all right, we've got to put in place this system. And then he systematically approached everything. We got to get UC Saros signed. We got to add some goal scoring talent to the top of the lineup. We got to continue to build through the draft. We got to restock the farm system with a lot of offensive weapons. We've got, now it's like, oh, we're running out of cap space. We can't sign guys. We got to trade somebody. We've talked about it for 3 weeks. Cody Glass is the guy to trade. They get $2.5 million off the books. We can discuss the trade itself and the value or whatever. Why do you have these draft picks? Well, he goes and does the thing that we all think is the right thing. He goes and does it. And now the next step in all of that, and this is my takeaway from the Cody Glass trade. If you guys want to spend some time on Cody Glass, that's fine. But the takeaway is that Barry Trotz is doing all the things that are in order that you need to do. And the next step is signing the RFAs, Yuso Parson and Philip Tomasino, and I guess it's Michael Del Gaizo. So to me, that's the sign of an organized general manager that's executing his plan, for better or for worse.
I'd argue the time for the truth serum was after the 9-2 ass whipping by the Dallas Stars, because that's when you would have gotten fully unfiltered Barry Trotz, what's going on in his mind, where is this team going? Because that 18-game point streak, no one saw that coming. He didn't see that coming. Andrew Burnett did not see that coming, and I think that really changed a lot of things. I think that I don't think they expected to be super competitive in the playoffs, but that stretch of games, that point streak, I think really opened his eyes to like, okay, when the team is organized, when they're on their stuff, like they can be a competitive team. And I think that was when the wheels started turning in his head once they went on that run, that maybe next year they could compete. And then when Ryan McDonagh requested the trade, that opened up the cap space. And I think that's when Trotz really was like, okay, there's so much I can do. Steven Stamkos is there, Marchessault, Shea. I'm sure there were other players that he kicked the tires on. But yeah, I think that would have been the time to find out that you would have got the real, raw, honest, unfiltered Barry Trotz. What are you thinking the future of this team is? Because I guarantee you the answer he would have gave then is a lot different than the answer he would have gave the day before free agency started.
Yeah, I think I actually had the misfortune of being in the elevator with Barry Trotz after that 9-2 loss. And I think it was, and he and I kind of have a rapport where he'll give me one word or a couple of words to describe the game, like immediately after it's over. And I wasn't even going to ask him after that one. I was like, no, it's fine. We don't need to talk. He just looks at me and he goes, not good. I was like, that's about as honest of an answer as you're going to get out of Barry Trotz.
Well, and so again, let's Cody Glass here. I do have some behind the scenes puppy calendar questions that are very serious that I've got for you, Emma. But Cody Glass is traded $2.5 million bucks off the books. Jordan Frasca, is that how I say that? Am I saying that correctly?
Frasca likes the soda.
Okay, from the Pittsburgh Penguins. They also include the 3rd round pick from the Minnesota Wild this year next year, 2025, and then a 6th round pick in 2026. And so again, what was the point of having all this draft capital? Well, it's to sweeten the pot, to take some contracts off your books if you need it. That's what they had to do here. Cody Glass finishes his career 121 games played, 20 goals, 29 assists, 49 points. And in the 22-23 season, they got the thing that maybe they thought they were buying, which is this top 10 former pick with a lot of potential and a lot of skill. And he delivered a 35-point season for this team in 72 games. But outside of that, I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure how to define the Cody Glass era. He's certainly a good dude, and Emma, you can speak to this as well. Like, he seems like a pretty good kid, and wish him the best of luck. But I guess it was a risk that didn't pan out, I suppose.
Yeah, I think with Cody Glass, I mean, first of all, he is truly as good of a person as you will ever meet, not just in this game, but in life. Like, he's been through so much, and he is, such a positive outlook. I think in his case, unfortunately, it's now happened twice to him in his career that he has become a victim of circumstance where he is in his development process, because certain players, everyone has their own path and they take their own time and their own route to get where they're going to be. And I think that twice now, first in Vegas and then now in Nashville, his development timeline has just been out of sync with the timeline for the organization that he's with. Now, at first, when he got to Nashville, it was a better situation for him. The team wasn't in win now mode. It was, they kind of had their time to be a little bit more patient with him, and get him where he needed to be. And I think as you mentioned, as a former top 10 draft pick, I mean, he carried that weight a lot with him. I think a lot of players do. And so it was difficult for him to navigate. And I think that again, everything just changed on a dime for the Predators this offseason with, all those signings on the first day of free agency. And suddenly this organization is in a very different place than they were, even a couple months ago. And so their timeline is different. Cody Glass's timeline, unfortunately, just doesn't really match up with where they're at. So I really do think, as hard as it is, as much as I'm going to miss seeing the kid every day because he's great, it's, if you look at it objectively, it really is the best thing for the player too, because I think it's similar. It's not the same situation, but similar to what we've talked about with Phil Tomasino, as someone who maybe will never quite get a truly clean slate with this organization just after what he's been through, deserved or not. It's just kind of where he's at. I feel like Cody Glass was kind of hitting that point as well. So I really think, as hard as it is, it's going to be the right thing for him to get that fresh start with another organization.
Yeah, I agree. And Cody Glass is one of my favorite players to interview, just to talk to, even like off the record. He was one of the most, I think, relatable players, at least in my opinion. Like, you can go up to him, win, lose, whatever, and just start talking about random stuff, and he'll carry on a conversation. And it doesn't have to be all about hockey with him. And that's what I really loved, was getting to get to know him as a person, outside of just, hey, you guys lost, give me a quote on what happened. You guys won, give me a quote on what happened, stuff like that. And I'll never forget, I want to say it was early to mid-March. It was like 2 or 3 games right after he just had his hat trick, and everyone was talking about how great he was. And then he got benched, and he got benched for like a 2 or 3 week stretch. And I remember talking to him during that time and asking him, like, it's got to be hard. You just had your first career hat trick. It looks like you're starting to come into your own. You're developing a little bit of chemistry and momentum, and then you get healthy scratch for like 3 or 4 games in a row. And he didn't complain. He didn't play the victim. He didn't do any of that. He was like, you know what? Obviously, I'm not doing something right, or Coach Burnett would keep me in the lineup. And I thought that really spoke volumes and said a lot about the character of him and who he is as a player. And, Emma and I have talked about it for the last, feels like the last year. There's nothing wrong with Cody Glass from a skill perspective. He's got all the skill in the world. His issue is what's going on in between the ears. And he needs a coaching staff that can afford to be a little bit patient with him, that can maybe bring him along a little bit slower. I don't know if Pittsburgh is the place to do that, but it's certainly a better situation than in Nashville, because Pittsburgh, as long as they got Sidney Crosby, they're always going to be looked at like, oh, you should make the playoffs. But given how last year ended, I don't really think there's a lot of steam behind Pittsburgh as a Stanley Cup contender. So it might be a good spot for him to go play in the bottom 6, get his feet under him, start to show a little bit of that offensive upside that he showed in 2022 when he had 14 goals and 35 points, and maybe kind of get his career back on track. I think at this point we know he's not going to be a top 6 player, but he absolutely can be kind of like a fill-in on the second line, more of a third line, steady force on the third line player. And I absolutely think he can be a very useful NHLer. It just wasn't going to happen here. There was just too much working against him. There's other young guys competing for the same spots as he is. There's a logjam at forward right now with everybody that the Predators have. And Andrew Burnett is not the kind of coach that has a lot of patience, that can kind of deal with Cody Glass the way he needs to be dealt, unfortunately. And we, Em and I've also said this for the last couple months, like, move him to the wing full time. If you want the most out of Cody Glass and you want him to reach his potential, I fully believe, move him to the wing, take the pressure off of him for being the center and being the driver of offense, and he will flourish to the best of his ability that he can at this point now.
However, if you, I agree. I think he should move to the wing. But if you are a young center, what better situation to be in than when you can just learn and absorb everything you can from Sidney Crosby every day? Like, I feel like it's a good situation for him.
Yeah.
I hope Nashville Predators fans are mentally prepared for career high Cody Glass alongside Sidney Crosby. I hope people are prepared for that. So here you mentioned the logjam, Michael, and this is what I think is interesting. I think, again, if you put Evangelista on the second line with Stamkos and Jonathan Marchessault, so you got your top six pretty set. You've got Novak, you got Sissons, you got Jankowski, you got Smith, and you got McCarron. And so is there one spot for Parsonen and Tomasino competing? Is that the extent of the camp battle that will be taking place with the forwards? Those two guys have to be signed. $3.095 million in cap space. It seems like you should be able to get Parson and Tomasino and Del Gaizo signed for less than that. But you also might need to make another move to make sure there's just a little bit of wiggle room. So I don't know so the two questions here for you guys are, what are the next moves out? Like, are you signing all three of the guys that are RFAs? And what is the actual battle now? And what's the lineup actually look like now that Cody Glass has been cleared? He's cleared off the deck.
I think you have to re-sign all three RFAs just because they're too young to give up on, and we've seen flashes from Parsonen and from Tomasino. And like we saw Del Gaizo like hold his own last year. I still say Mark Del Gaizo can be a pretty good third pairing defenseman in the NHL next year. You don't need him to go out there and do the things Roman Josi does. You just need him to go out there and not make a lot of mistakes, and he's pretty good at that. I'm still not convinced that someone else doesn't get traded though, for the simple fact that they have a little under 3.1 million in cap space. If you re-sign Tomasino, Parson, and Del Gaizo, you're figuring, Del Gaizo, $895,000 a year, Tomasino, Parson right around the $1 million a year, somewhere in there. That's going to leave you with like $25,000 in cap space. Barry Trotz is not going to go into the regular season not having some sort of cushion for planning worst case scenario when anything happens. Like, I still think someone else gets moved, and someone has to be moved. You need to have a little bit of cap flexibility to have options available if there's a big injury, if you get to the trade deadline and you find yourself needing to buy a piece just because something happens. Like, I just feel like someone else has to be moved. I don't know who it is. We all know who we think makes the most sense, but I just think that there's got to be another move coming, and I do think all three RFAs get re-signed, or maybe one of the RFAs get traded. I mean, maybe there's something going on behind the scenes where maybe Tomasino's on his way. Who knows? There's at least two signings and one corresponding trade. I feel like that has to be made before they're all set.
It only took 18 minutes this time for us to mention who we think makes the most sense.
I didn't mention him. I just alluded to him.
Should we start like doing a Voldemort thing? Like he shall be named unnamed or shall remain nameless, or just
I thought you were gonna say like
call him Deuce.
I thought you were gonna say like a swear jar. Like every time we talk about him, we have to put $1 in the swear jar.
I just think we shouldn't use the name anymore. Like
Deuce.
By the way, I did a very
appropriate nickname.
I did the math. I did not make that joke. That was Michael Gallagher at MG Sports _ if you're listening, Mr.
His number's 2. 2 means deuce.
I'm aware of the joke. I made the joke. You made a poop joke. That's different. Okay. I did the math real fast while y'all were talking. Because you said something about $25,000. If it's $1 million and $1 million and $895, that's about $200,000 in cap space. But
whatever. I was not. I'm doing all this on the fly.
No. Here's the math I did.
My point is still valid.
How much money do you think Roman Josi makes in a period of hockey?
This is what you were doing while we were talking? Yeah. Were we really that boring to listen to?
It took 5 seconds. I'm good at math.
$62,000.
That's a pretty good guess. It's a pretty good guess. Emma, you got a guess?
I was a Spanish major, so no, I don't. I'll go with 59,000 because he's number 59.
So at $9.059 million, if he plays all 82 games, he makes $36,825 a period. So to your earlier point, Michael, they've got about a period of Roman Josi left in cap space, and it's about $110,000 a game for Roman Josi. By the way, good work if you can get it. But basically they're going to have a game of Roman Josi left in cap space is what they're going to have. So I agree. I don't think that's a very good place to go into the season, especially if you are expecting to contend. So if you're expecting to contend, there has to be one semi-large contract. And I do think that $2.75 million would count as a large enough contract to potentially give you just enough space to make a move. You might even need to make a second move. If you want to acquire someone at the deadline, you might even need to make a second move, which is, I don't know. At that point, you're starting to thin out the defense core or, your actual starting lineup at that point.
I will throw this out there just because I don't want to keep picking on the same guy, but Dante Fabro makes $2.5 million. That would go, I won't say a long way, but that would go a decent way towards setting them up for what they could potentially want to do. And I also, call me crazy, I also wouldn't rule out the possibility of Colton Sissons and his $2.86 million being on the chopping block at some point.
Okay, that's a fascinating topic to bring up.
I'm not reporting anything. I'm just saying I wouldn't be surprised if that is on the table at some point.
My question is does that help you win? Like, if you're getting a much better piece than Colton Sissons back in return, fine. But you still have to have the guy that does all the shit that he does for the team.
It depends on who you're replacing him with. I mean, the scenario I'm envisioning is Sissons gets traded for cap relief, Parsonen steps in and kind of fills that void because that just makes the most logical sense out of everyone they have on the roster. I don't think that's definitely not an even move, and I wouldn't consider it it's not an improvement. I wouldn't consider it a lateral move, but I don't think the drop off from Sissons to Parsonen is so great that you couldn't just grit your teeth and bear it if you needed to. But
I think there's a big gap there, big guy.
I'm as one of those out there. I'm against getting rid of someone like Colton Sissons because he's very valuable. However, if they need cap space and they're convinced there's someone on the roster that can step into a third or a fourth line center role, they might do it.
They don't have anyone who can play center right now. I mean, you have Michael McCarron and you have maybe Juuso Parsonen if he makes the roster and if he's healthy. And those are two big ifs because he hasn't been able to do either consistently over the last couple seasons. So I think he has potential to fill the Colton Sissons void eventually, but not this year. I think that also another thing that's important to point out is that Andrew Brunette loves Colton Sissons. And I know he's not the one making the trades and doing the deals, but I think that his input would probably go a long way.
So I think this is a fascinating topic because I think it is a worthwhile exercise in the summer to sort of stretch your mental gymnastics and say, all right, what's the thing we're not seeing? What's the move that could happen? Ryan McDonough would have been qualified sort of in this category. Steady Stroker 94. Okay. Says if you put it on the screen, I'm going to read it. Mark Jankowski, of course, is an option. I don't know if that's enough money, but obviously I think that, I don't think
Jankowski makes $800,000. That's nothing.
But
you need someone that's making $2 million or more for it to really make a dent in what they need cap wise.
Let me float the idea then, because if we're going to do this, then you sort of have to take a bigger swing at it, and you have to be a little bit more, I don't want to say hot takey, but let's be logical about this.
I think I know what you're going to say.
Tommy Novak is the guy.
Oh,
Tommy Novak is the piece. $3.5 million. If he's playing well, and if you think you can get a veteran for the same price, and that's the thing you need, I don't know. I'm not suggesting they do this stuff. I'm not even saying I would be in favor of it.
I don't think that's hot takey just because up until about 2 weeks before he was re-signed, we didn't know what he was to this team. We didn't know if he was figuring into their long-term plans. Was he going to be traded at the deadline? There were a lot of teams that were putting out feelers with Tommy Novak that they were willing to offer pretty substantial draft capital to trade for him. And you called me crazy when I said that if he hit the free agent market, he could probably get somewhere close to the $5 million per year range. I still stand by that. I heard that there was a team that was willing. I heard that there was a team that was willing to go $4.25 million for Tommy Novak.
This is not about my analysis of his game. That's not what this is. I am looking at the roster at a piece that's worth more than $3.5 million. Who's young and under contract, and find somebody who loves you as much as Tampa Bay loves Tanner Jeannot. And that's what this is about. I am not suggesting it's the right move for the team. Emma,
I didn't say anything.
You got your hands over your face like I attacked your dog.
Sorry, I'm still not over the name of the commenter that you just read out loud. But sorry, I'm still there.
Here, I didn't put it on the screen though. Josh Wright says also one of Novak or Nyquist have to lose their spot in the top 6.
Thank you, Josh Wright, for having a normal name. Again, I would not rule out Tommy Novak as a potential trade chip eventually. I don't know that it happens right now while he still has all 3 years on that contract. I could see another team being more willing to take on said contract if it's only got 2 years left on it. Plus, again, I keep going back to this team lacks quality centers, which is why someone like, and yes, is he an elite center right now? No, but the hope is that, he has the potential to kind of step into that second line center role. And then, I mean, even if Steven Stamkos shifts back to center, you only get 4 years of him. You may only even get like 2 good years of him. And so you just don't really know. And it's all things that could happen, but I think that's what makes a guy like Colton Sissons valuable to this team. It's like what makes Tommy Novak valuable to this team. And I think that I don't know. It's just, I understand it's the summertime and we're getting hot takey, but I think that
it's which contract. I mean, look, he who shall remain nameless is clearly the number 1 contract that everyone would want to move or should want to move. That's not even close. But then if you just start going down the list, like, again, if this team is supposed to contend for a Western Conference final or get to the second round or whatever expectations are in your mind for the team, which guy do you want going out there in a playoff series? And right now, it is not. I would rather have Colton Sissons. He's also less expensive, so you're going to get
especially if you're playing Vancouver.
I want Colton Sissons in the lineup. His contract is smaller and therefore less expensive, and probably maybe worth less on the market. Tommy Novak might be worth more in terms of a return. So I'm just using logic here. I'm not suggesting they should do it, because to your point, Emma, he's a center and they can play center and they need everybody, every space body that can play center to play center for the team. There's no question about it.
Well, also too, I mean, Colton Sissons has experience. Granted, they didn't win the cup, but he has experience playing in a first line center role in the Stanley Cup final. Like Colton Sissons has the skins on the wall where Tommy Novak doesn't. And it's no knock against Novak. I think he can be a fine player, but I would rather take someone with Colton Sissons' skill set over someone with Tommy Novak's skill set, just because he's more versatile. He can do more. He can play up and down the lineup. Colton Sissons adds more value to this team than Tommy Novak does, and Tommy Novak happens to be making more money. So if you're going to get rid of one of the two, not saying they have to do that, but if it comes to that, Novak makes the more sense than getting rid of someone like Sissons. My only thing with throwing Sissons' name out there is, if they get desperate for cap space, that's a contract that I think that they would look hard at. Not saying that it would lead anywhere, but I think that's a contract that would be on the table if they're looking to trade someone, as would Novak.
I really don't like that idea.
I'm not saying it's a good idea. I'm just saying that if it comes to it, don't be surprised if that's something that is discussed.
You really want to piss Braden off? Let's trade Colton Sissons and Luke Evangelista and Tanner Molendyke right now.
We're trading.
Braden would quit. He would just quit.
Luke Evangelista, Colton Sissons, and Tanner Molendyke for Mitch Marner right now. Would you do it? No.
Okay, Gover.
No, I wouldn't. Austin Green completely disagrees with me, by the way. Also a great normal name. Way to go. Good job, Austin's parents. Would rather trade Sissons than before trading Novak. They're a different type of player in terms of style, but the upside of Novak is higher than Sissons. No questions there. No argument there about the upside. It's clear that Tommy Novak is going to go out and have a 70-point season and uses the gold standard and lower broad hockey as motivation. It's obvious. Brando Tolerari. I'm sorry, Brando. I apologize. I still think Novak has levels in his game that he can reach. That is absolutely correct. There's no question. JD, what's up? Braden's shirt is absolute fire. That's completely relevant. I agree. Tommy Novak could have a great season and show us why the Predators invested the money they did in him this year. It's absolutely possible he takes a step. And if that happens, then at that time, he becomes more valuable than Colton Sissons because he can score goals, by and large, more so than Colton Sissons did. Although Colton Sissons, I believe, coming off a career high in points in Andrew Burnett's system. Let's not forget about that.
Tied his career high in goals, though. That killed me.
Well, it's because he scored like 1 goal in the last like 35 games. He was on pace to destroy it. But
yeah,
anyway.
we were a little top heavy. That's all right.
Another normal human name, Drew Smizer. Tomasino has had the same opportunity of time as Cody Glass has had on the Predators. That's 3 seasons and has similar stats, similar vibe of falling short in those stats. If you're the GM, would you re-sign Tomasino? I think the answer now that you've traded Cody Glass and you're getting a similar player for about $1 million versus 2.5, and a guy who can play center and wing, very skilled, very talented, all first round pick, the whole stuff, very similar resume. I think the answer is absolutely you need to have him on the roster. You can still trade him, but you need him.
Oh, for sure. And yeah, sure, they've had the same amount of time on the roster, but if you compare Cody Glass's tenure to Tomasino's tenure, it's not even close. Tomasino is far and away better. 23 goals, 70 points in 148 games. I mean, he got a lot of run in the power play, 7 power play goals, 12 power play assists. Like, and the thing too is Tomasino is still young enough. I know Cody Glass was a top 6 draft pick, but Tomasino was also a first round draft pick. And I just feel like the upside to develop into a top scorer is better for Tomasino than it was for Glass at the same age. I just feel like you don't give up on someone with Tomasino's skill set right now. In a year or two, maybe, but right now, just because, I mean, we're talking about it, like he could be fighting for one of the spots on the roster in training camp if he gets that spot and he's consistent with his playing time. I mean, we saw what he did in his rookie year, 11 goals and 32 points, and he was playing, no offense to Cole Smith and to, I forgot who the other player was, Nick Cousins. No offense to those guys, but he put up 11 goals and 32 points playing on the 4th line with those 2 guys. If he could get that kind of consistent playing time on a 2nd or a 3rd line with better players, he's going to get that much better.
Yeah, that's Stanley Cup champion Nick Cousins to you. I wasn't even here then. I just feel like
Nick Cousins had
name.
nothing to do with that Stanley Cup win.
That's best trash talker in the NHL, apparently. Daniel Ackerman, and by the way, this is a good segue here because Daniel Ackerman says claiming Steady Stroker 94 as my LBH Lower Broad Hockey Fantasy Hockey team. Now, so here's the deal, because we've had a fantasy hockey league each of the last couple of seasons. I beat Michael and Jeremy by finishing 10th out of 12. Jeremy K. Gover finished 12th out of 12.
Let me correct you. You beat Michael's autopilot because I did not. I set that lineup at the beginning of the year and I didn't touch it the rest. So
I don't want to hear excuses. Okay, those are excuses. I don't care about excuses. But here's the deal: we will have another fantasy hockey league this year, and Emma's invited if she'd like to be a part of it. But it's going to be all subscriber only, so we're going to do that on Lower Broad Hockey. So lowerbroadhockey.com. And of course, we're going to discuss the fantasy league there. We will have I'll be able to submit in the chat room all the links and everything. So we'll have a league. There's been a lot of you guys that have been asking. Shout out to George and Brad and the rest of you guys who've been asking about this. And Daniel, of course, is with a name like that, you're automatically grandfathered into the league. But here's my question about this lineup thing, because if you're going to have Novak as your 3rd line center and you want that to be a more offensive line, that's where you could see Tomasino and maybe Parsonen being packaged together. But then there's where's Sisson's play? Is Sisson's going to play down on the 4th line? What happens to Jankowski at that point? Like, do you want to break up the 4th line? Like, it is sort of tricky to figure out where to put everybody. If all of a sudden you've got Tomasino and Novak and Parsonen, all guys with high skill level, playing in that bottom 6. I don't. That's what's interesting to me is the coach has some interesting decisions to make at that point.
Here's the reality of it. Like, best case scenario, Parson and Tomasino both make the roster at a training camp. It's probably not going to happen because Jankowski and Colton Sissons played so well together down the stretch last year. It's hard to break up someone that has just natural chemistry. So it would make sense to keep Sissons and Jankowski paired together, and then probably Parson's going to fill that other spot.
You can't put Novak on the 4th line though. Like at that point, like that's not going to maximize his talent, right?
I mean, I think personally, what I think happens is the 2nd line is Novak, Marchessault, and Stamkos, and then you get Luke Evangelista with Colton Sissons and Jankowski on the 3rd line.
Well, you've attacked Colton Sissons and moved Luke Evangelista down the lineup today, Michael.
I'm just saying, I've covered this team so long that what makes sense is not what they're going to do. They're going to piss people off when it comes to their lineup decisions. I'm telling you, what I just said is probably going to be the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th line. That's just the way it is. Personally, I don't think Mark Jankowski is that great of a hockey player. I think he's fine for what he is. But I would bet on the upside of Parsonen and Tomasino over what I already know Mark Jankowski is if it were me making the decisions.
Emma, could Mark Jankowski not take over the Kiefer Sherwood role and play really well on that fourth line? And then to Austin's point in the comment, and this is the first line I wrote down, which is third line, Novak, Sissons, Tomasino, which is a little bit of a weird combination of skills, but could be very interesting. But then you have to go Jankowski, McCarron, Smith on the fourth line. So thoughts?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, if I were to make a prediction right now, I don't think if assuming he's re-signed, I don't think Tomasino makes the NHL roster out of camp. Just putting that out there now.
I agree with you, by the way.
I think Parsonen has a better chance. Now, it's hard because Jankowski is like almost like a great value Colton Sissons. Like he's not quite as good, but I think that he's got a similar he's got a similar value. Like
he's a Kroger brand player.
He's a generic brand Colton Sissons because
at least you didn't say Dollar Tree version.
Yeah, no, I think I don't know. He's a budget Colton Sissons, and I think that he plays a similar game. He's versatile. He can play the wing. He can play center. He can play up and down the lineup if you need him to. Do you want him on your second line? No, but he can do that if you need him to. He's also a very good penalty killer, as is Colton Sissons. So I think that that's an important piece to keep in mind when figuring out what his role is going to be if he is on the roster. But I think to answer your question, Braden, yes, I think he can fill the Kiefer Sherwood role. However, like Michael, I think there's a difference in what should happen and what will happen. To me, as soon as Kiefer Sherwood signed with Vancouver, I immediately, I think the first thing I said to myself was, oh, spot just opened for Juuso Parsonen.
Yeah,
that's his spot. I think it just makes sense. And again, an important reminder to everyone, and I think it ties into our conversation last week about how training camp means nothing. Not that it means nothing, but there no major decisions are being made at training camp.
Don't overreact to the storylines coming out of camp. Yeah.
Yes, don't overreact to whatever the opening night lineup is, because it's certainly not set in stone.
What? Andrew Burnett's going to change his lineup? Because this is what I was going to get to.
Let us all remember that Juuso Parsonen started on the top line last year.
The Nashville Predators made it to the Stanley Cup final with an opening game one starting first line with Harry Zolnarchuk against the Chicago Blackhawks. I just want to point that out. Here's the most important thing is for Andrew Burnett to have options. If he wants to play a speed offense game, because that's the matchup and that's the thing that night calls for, and you want to have a line where Tommy Novak is your third line center with Tomasino and Parsonen or Colton Sissons, and you want to move Sissons down and play just a fourth line thumping line, or if you want to put in Parsonen and Colton Sissons and Jankowski on a line and play a dirtier game. You have to have options. And Tomasino, Parsonen, Sissons, Novak, all those guys give you options on the bottom six to create either a third scoring line or maybe a better penalty kill line or a better defensive zone line. You got to have some options because you're going to run into teams where you're going to have to change your style a little bit. And honestly, that's what makes a coach great, is his ability to mix and match throughout the course of the year. If you had elite talent at every position, that's when you say, don't mess up with the lineups. Just put them all out there and let's go to town. I do agree, and I don't like that I feel this way. I do think that Tommy Novak will start as the second line center.
I
think that's what's going to happen. And I will not stand for this Luke Evangelista slander.
Well, going back quickly to Jankowski, I would not want to get too hung up on where he plays either, just because to me, I think he is the consummate extra forward. He thrives in that role. He did it when he first, when he came to the Predators in the 22 season. that he was, he's a guy that you can call upon to plug and play in your lineup. He's a journeyman. He's got tons of NHL experience. He's not a guy who necessarily needs to get ramped up to play at a certain level. Like, you kind of know what he's going to give you. And so I think that now, is that the role that he wants? Probably not. I mean, I'm sure he wants to be playing every night, but I think that he is the consummate extra forward. And I think that I would not worry too much about where he's playing. Also, again, he's making $800,000. Like, it's not worth worrying about.
Mark Jankowski is just happy to be there, man. He doesn't care where he plays. He doesn't care how often he plays. He just wants to play. And if you want to throw him out there, he'll go. Like, it's almost a shame that they can't have like a taxi squad that you can bring back, because Mark Jankowski would be a perfect player to have on that. Because ideally, I think what makes the most sense is having a rotation of Jankowski, Parson, and Tomasino, dependent on which team you're playing, because those guys all present different matchup problems for different opponents. But unfortunately, like, you only have 2 actual roster spots and you have 3 players. And because Jankowski's already on the NHL roster and Tomasino's already in Milwaukee, like, you're not going to call Tomasino up unless you know for sure he's going to be on the roster, because then you have to expose him to waivers and you have another Eeli Tolvanen situation. They're just not going to do that. I wish there was a way to make everybody happy, because Jankowski is a really good, nice guy. And like I said, he's just happy to be there. He wants to play whenever. If you could find a way to make a rotation work, that would be great. I just don't see a way. There's just too many mouths to feed with what they have.
So this sort of feels like a 25-year issue here, and Steady has already said demote McCarron here. Here's the thing. For 25 years, and you guys have both used separate phrases for this guy, and I'm going to use a third phrase. Because there are, in any sport, to me, there are dudes and there are not a dude. And a dude is Steven Stamkos. A dude is Philip Forsberg. A dude is a guy who is just clearly a dog, like, who's out there and is established. He's a star. He's there. So
dude is a dog.
A dude is a dog. Willie, where are you, Willie? So you said extra forward. You got like an extra forward. Michael called him happy to be there, and I'm calling him not a dude. The problem with this franchise is that they have had 6 not dudes in their starting lineup for 25 years. And the goal of this new regime is to start limiting that to like 3 or 4.
And that's what I'm saying, is he should not be in the starting lineup every night. Does he still have value on the team as a member of the roster? Absolutely. And I'm not saying that he should be in the starting lineup every night. And there should not be 6 extra forwards, not a dudes, happy to be theirs, in dudes or dogs, whatever, in the lineup every night. I totally agree with you, but I don't think you have that problem now. Like, we're just talking about Mark Jankowski as one guy. It used to be an entire team of those guys, and now we don't really have that problem anymore, which is why I would say don't get hung up on it.
I would say last year they had that problem, and it's why they went and got 2 players to play in their top 6 or top 9 at the deadline as basically trade-offs for other teams when they went and got the 2 guys they did. But I do think it's down to like 4, and I think, or 3 even. I think it's down to like 3. And again, there were times where I was watching this team where they had like 8, just a guys.
The entire roster was just a guy.
Josh Wright says JAG, just a guy. And the key is there, you do need some of those guys to win dirty scrums and, put into difficult situations, step in when injuries happen, playing a different type of team. Like, you need those guys. But it used to be 7 or 8 of them. And this is the first time ever where there's like 3 or 4 of them on the roster right now. And I think that's the point, is where Barry Trotz is taking the roster, is to get rid of happy to be here, extra forward, not a dude, just a guy.
Not get rid of them entirely, but to balance out the ratio a little better.
Yes, that's a good way of saying it. And again, maybe count on them less in critical moments.
Yes.
In high leverage situations.
Use them for what they are, and don't, use them for roles that are bigger than what they are.
This is just a shift. We need just a guy for just a shift. Okay, I want you guys to hear a little bit about this interview. Over at Lower Broad Hockey, I had a chance for 30 minutes to sit down with Director of Goaltending Mitch Korn. He, of course, was here under Barry Trotz from 1998 to 2014. Won a cup with Barry Trotz with the Washington Capitals. He's coached 5 Vezina Trophy goaltenders. and we'll discuss a little bit after this, but there was a 30-minute interview I conducted with him. I've got a story coming up tomorrow about how to build and construct a goaltender and what it means for Yaroslav Askarov's future. So make sure you check that out, coming up on Lower Broad Hockey on Thursday morning. But the interview's already up now. It came out Monday morning, talked a lot about basically everything, how to develop goaltenders, mental, physical traits, anything you could possibly need to know about the goaltending position, how to run the operation. Mitch Korn is now in charge of that operation for the Nashville Predators. So I wanted you to catch a little glimpse of this. The whole entire interview, of course, you got to be a subscriber over at Lower Broad Hockey. But here was a quick taste of sort of him describing sort of some of the mental aspect of this and how to develop a goaltender. Let's listen.
Okay. Then let's take the mental aspect. The mental aspect of the game, it runs a whole gamut from processing the game itself to mental toughness, to tracking the puck, all these things that are mental, you don't see as much. It's harder to change. You can't change it on the front end. You have to sometimes change it on the back end. Things have to occur. It requires a body of work in order to determine those kinds of things. And then the third is the emotional part of the game. And the emotional part of the game is really interesting because there are always going to be emotions. Emotions need to help you get better. Emotions don't need to detract from you. And when you can't manage your emotions, or the emotions become too strong to manage mentally, that's when we get into problems. And again, you can't improve those areas until they fall apart. That you have to see them. That see that a guy melts down at this point, or this happens, or that happens. And it's not easy to fix because it's not like the NFL. I can't talk to them in their helmets, okay, during the game and say, "Hey, calm down. It's okay." You can't do that. So those are the three broad areas. And then within them, there's 1,000 things, right? And it's always changing as well because the NHL is always changing. The game is always changing. And these athletes are always changing.
So there you go. Mitch Korn talking about the three aspects of development: mental, physical, and emotional. He spent a little time there talking about the mental and emotional. Now, those were not comments directed in response to a Yaroslav Askarov question. When I asked him about Yaroslav Askarov directly, he basically said he's not going to comment. He's watched some film and he's met with Askarov before, but he's not going to comment specifically on Askarov. But one of my takeaways from our conversation was very clearly that Yaroslav Askarov is not ready yet to be in the league, which, of course, Michael wrote a big story about that as well in Lower Broad Hockey. I think it's interesting that he said you can't fix the mentals and the emotional stuff until you see it. I thought that was very interesting. You don't know where a guy's line is emotionally, mentally, where he breaks down, where he cracks, where he starts to lose control, where he starts losing focus. But Yaroslav Askarov has given him two examples of that in the postseason the last 2 years in the AHL for Milwaukee. So I don't know if you guys have any takeaways from Mitch Korn's conversation, the entirety of the interview, or just his comments about mental and emotional parts of the game as a goaltender.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting hearing him say that because it kind of falls in line with the story I wrote on Askarov. And I know he wasn't singling Askarov out and he wasn't mentioning him specifically, but what he said definitely is applicable to Askarov. And it was a reflection of what Derek Neumeyer told me when I interviewed him, the assistant director of scouting for McKean's Hockey. The quote about Askarov was, he said, "In some ways, he kind of reminds me of Jordan Binnington, where he sometimes can be his own worst enemy, where he does get into his own head a little bit, or he makes a dumb decision, he gets a little too hot, and he kind of loses his composure." And that's really what has led to him being yanked from the starter's crease in the postseason the last 2 years in a row. So to hear Mitch Korn basically echo the same thing without specifically talking about that specific player, I thought was interesting because to him, I feel like he's not just going to flippantly say that unless he has something in mind that he is like specifically addressing. I don't think we have to worry about that with UC Saros. Don't have to worry about that with Scott Wedgwood. So, but, by process of elimination, that leaves Askarov. And I think it's just interesting that that's something that's being talked about with him a lot now. And Barry Trotz didn't really go into too much detail about Askarov at the end of season press conference about his role and stuff like that. But I think it's clear the intention is for him to start in Milwaukee because that's where he needs to be right now. They have a good backup, a good backup goaltender They have a good starter. There's no need to rush him to the NHL when they can let him over marinate, to use Barry Trotz's phrase, and let him continue to develop. And I think that's something. I don't think they're leaving him in Milwaukee to refine his skills. I think he has the skills right now where he could be efficient in the NHL. I think they're trying to get the bad habits out of him. I think they're trying to get his temper under control. I think they're trying to get him to play with the kind of poise that UC Saros plays with. I think that is what they're trying to work on, keeping him in Milwaukee. I don't think it has anything to do with what he can do in between the pipes. It's everything to do with his demeanor and how he handles adversity, because that's the one thing, the one knock on him is when he comes up against that adversity, he doesn't always respond the greatest in those situations.
Yeah, I think, it's the same thing we've been saying for a long time. With if skill was all that mattered, he'd be in the NHL right now.
Yep.
It's clearly not all that matters. And again, not saying that he's like a loose cannon who's at risk of popping off any moment, but I think that it's certain, like I said before, talking about Cody Glass, it applies to goalies too. Like, different areas of your game are going to develop at different paces, and that's okay. And so I think that, you don't want to fast track him to the NHL to set him up for failure, because first of all, there isn't a clear pathway for him to do that right now with this organization. So I think that he's, it's everything that's already been said. He should be in Milwaukee, and that's where he's going to start the season.
Yep, I agree. Basically, when you look through how Mitch and his sort of view of the position, like, you've got to have all the pieces put together. You can never put the game in jeopardy. Those are things that he said. You can't fix them because you can't see them, and you can't see them until they fall apart, but you can't see them unless the guy's playing every single night. Everything he said, which none of it was directly related to Askarov, all to me in my brain tracked back to Yaroslav Askarov. And so again, you mentioned what the other
Barry Trotz even kind of addressed this a little bit too, and this was in my story. Go read it at Low Broad Hockey. But he even said, he's like, look, there was the year that Pecorini he was in a similar situation with Askarov. They expected him to kind of make that jump, and he ended up staying. It was the 2007-2008 season. He ended up staying and playing most of that year in Milwaukee. And Trotz even said, he goes, if you talk to Pekka, he'll tell you that was the best thing for him, getting that extra year, having everything come together. He even said mind, body, spirit, the technical game, all of that. I think this can be a similar learning experience for Askarov if he embraces it that way. If he looks at it as, I'm ready, and damn it, if they're not going to play me, then I'm going to force a trade and force my way out of here, then he's not really going to grow from this situation, and good luck to him at another team.
So I think the other thing was I asked him about Scott Wedgwood. I said, why Scott Wedgwood? And one of the more interesting quotes that he gave me was, we had to fill that position, was the quote. And to me, that's also an indication of that Askarov was never an option to fill that position. So they went out and got Scott Wedgwood, and that it wasn't their decision. They wanted Kevin Lankinen back, and that Lankinen technically is now sitting still on the free agency market unsigned. So I don't know if that means Lankinen made a bad decision or not. Maybe I think he's going to end up getting signed by somebody at some point, and probably get more chances to be a starter than he does behind UC Saros. So I think it's still.
I think Lankinen overestimated the market for him is what happened.
Sure.
Yeah. And I think, I'm sure, just based on what his salary was last year, that he was asking for more than Scott Wedgwood would have, which I think is fair because he was making that last year. But going back to what Mitch said about, filling that position is a backup goaltender. You didn't draft Yaroslav Askarov to be your backup goaltender. That's not his role. That's not what you want him to be.
Yeah.
He's a starting goaltender, and he is going to be a starting goaltender in Milwaukee. And that doesn't mean that he'll never be a starting goaltender in Nashville. I think people just get so hung up on that. And it's just the fact of the matter is, it's just, especially after listening to Scott Wedgwood talk when he came to Nashville, it's such a unique position to be in, the backup goaltender, that even he sees it differently than Lankinen would, for example, because Lankinen still has starting aspirations.
Yep.
Scott Wedgwood is a career backup, really.
Yep.
There was the one season in Arizona where he was the starter, but he has a very unique understanding of the role that I think is going to be really invaluable in, his that's part of the mental piece where he is there and he gets it, and Askarov is not, and that's okay. He's so young.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah, no.
I look at Wedgwood kind of similar to Anders Lindbach, to where like he's good enough to start 10 games in a row if you need him to, but he knows that he's a backup and he's not going to be that starting goaltender. And I know Lindbach got traded to Tampa and he was supposed to be their heir apparent. That didn't work out, but I view Wedgwood in kind of the similar role as what Lindbach filled, to where you know you're a backup and you're not expecting to contend for starting time. Whereas Lankinen last year, I think he looked at every start that he got as an audition for 2024.
So there's a lot of comments here, and I want to work through some of these before we wrap up the show, but it's getting kind of late. And Austin's question, I think, is the most interesting one that maybe we can save until next week. Austin says, if Askarov is able to get that under control in a year or two, what do you think happens with 6 or 7 years left on Saros's contract at that point? Do you just run a 1A, 1B situation? I actually think there is a perfect scenario for the Predators, but I'm going to save that until next week and we can discuss that. Obviously, Dark says Saros and Askarov could be the new Swayman Olmark once Askey is ready. And then Austin responds with, is that sustainable to run that kind of situation with the two of them together for 6 years? And I agree that it is not.
How did that work for Boston?
Yeah, I don't think it's sustainable. I think it works for maybe 2 years. I mean, Saros did it for a couple of years, but I don't think it works for 6. And which again, I think there means I think there are two main strategies at play here for the Preds, and both of them are solid. But we can dive into that a little bit deeper, and both involve trading one of them, obviously. Here's the most important take, though. Brando says, I'd rather have Simone Biles in the lineup than Tomasino. Look, Simone Biles is maybe the greatest gymnast in the history of the world. I mean, 4'7". If you think Tommy Novak is small, I don't know.
I think she could probably take a punch better than Tommy Novak could.
Ooh, I don't
to be
know.
honest.
I don't think that's insulting, actually. I mean,
no, it's supposed to be a compliment.
Yeah,
I mean, she's solid. Yeah.
All right, so we'll end on this. Make sure you go check out Lower Broad Hockey at @MGSports_ for Michael, at Emma _Lingan for Emma. You can catch her weekly newsletter on Lower Broad Hockey Substack every Friday. Michael's got a big story coming up about the front office. I've got a big story on Thursday. If you're listening to this on Thursday, it's already out. Go check it out. All about the jigsaw puzzle that Mitch Korn puts together when he develops a goaltender and sort of what his philosophy means for the Preds' future in net. I do think, and this will be a little tease for the story, I do think that organizationally, there are few places in the world that have a better goaltending situation than the Nashville Predators. A director who has won 5 Vezinas and a Stanley Cup, a coach who has won in Ben Vanderklok a Vezina trophy with Pekka Rinne, a scout in Pekka Rinne that's won a Vezina trophy, UC Saros, Scott Wedgwood, and one of the best prospects in the world. Top to bottom, there is no weakness there in the organization when it comes to the netminder. So I think they're in a really good situation. If you missed the interview and you want to check it out quickly, we talked about the categories of goaltending, balancing emotion and personality, the most important trait in a goaltender, having tough conversations with your goaltender, his relationship, Mitch Korn, with Ben Vanderklok, comparing UC Saros to Dominik Hasek, organizational luck and how they've done drafting players, Barry Trotz, Scott Wedgwood, you name it. We talked about it in that interview. Last but not least, Emma, Cody Glass is on August for the Nashville Predators puppy calendar. Here's my question. How many of those dogs are actually owned by the Predators? Not the team, like by the player themselves.
So most of them.
Important question as we own together like 4 dogs.
Well, the point of the calendar is they were adoptable puppies from Wags and Walks. So that was the point of the calendar, is you're trying to get them to, but
did not know that. Shout out to Wags and Walks, which is where we got our boy Willie Nelson. They do a great job. So check out Wags and Walks.
I have volunteered with them.
They're awesome. Yeah.
They're great. But no, I think if I remember correctly, the only dog that was actually owned by a player was UC's dog. Nala, who
the big
was
husky.
No, that's Kessa. Nala is the one who they adopted from Wags and Walks. So that's what the partnership is.
That's symbology right there. That's synergy right there.
That is symbology. That's sure a word.
Yep. Yeah. You've obviously never seen Boondock Saints. Shout out to all the old heads who've watched Boondock Saints.
But I will say, and this might surprise you because it surprised me, by far the happiest person to be at that calendar shoot that day, the guy that like we had to drag out of the room because he was late for a meeting and like he could not put the puppies down. Yuso Parsonen.
All right.
It's like the
I thought you were
most-
going to
Okay.
say Luke Shen.
I was. No, he said the name. He said the name.
dollar in the swear jar. No, it was
the
Yuso
internet stopped
Parsonen.
working. Everything crashes.
Does Parson own a dog now?
No, he doesn't. And I
Oh,
thought
that's a
he was
bummer.
going to by the end of that day, by the end of the day. Like I
Well,
asked him and he was like, "Yeah, I don't know if my girlfriend would go for that." So
Is
Did
anyone
any of the players adopt a dog from the shoot?
no.
That's disappointing.
What a bunch of frauds. Here's the question. If you're looking at the tea leaves and Cody Glass gets traded the month that he's on the calendar, which month is Luke Shen on the calendar? Now it's just getting mean-spirited. Okay. All right. So,
September, maybe. I don't know.
all right. That'll be the end of that. Emma, where can the good people find your other work?
You can find my other work online at the Hockey News and at the Locked On Predators podcast. And at It's All Your Fault with Gover. Taking a little summer
I've never heard of that other one. I've heard of It's All Your Fault. So
taking a little hiatus for the summer with Gover. We had a great interview though on our last episode with former assistant coach Dan Highnote. So definitely go check that out.
there you go. It's all your fault, Jeremy K. Gover. That's it. It's all your fault, Jeremy K. Gover. For Michael and for Emma, we appreciate all you guys in the comments. And again, this community is only going to keep growing as we get closer and closer to camp and then the season starts. It's going to be a really fun year. And appreciate all you guys for listening, for hanging out. If you're on YouTube and you happen to be watching, give us a thumbs up. We would appreciate that. And subscribe to the products. We also appreciate that. Podcast app. Make sure you rate, review, subscribe. That's how people find us, and share the show. Tell somebody about Lower Broad. Tell somebody about the Gold Standard. Tell somebody about all of our great hosts here on the show and of course, all the work that they're doing. So please support all the good local folks here covering the Nashville Predators. We do appreciate all the work that they do. Other than that, I think that's about it. Thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you guys next week. Appreciate it.